I used to think being competitive meant being affordable. That if I could just make the offer slightly easier to say yes to than everyone else, I'd win more often. And in the beginning, that actually works. You get responses. You get traction. You get that feeling like, okay, this is moving. But there's a point where something starts to feel off. You notice that every time you lower the price to stay competitive, the relief is temporary. It helps in the moment, but it doesn't solve anything long-term. And what I didn't realize at first is that I was slowly training the business to depend on that. To depend on being the cheaper option. To depend on comparison. To depend on someone looking at two choices and deciding I'm the safer bet. And that's a fragile position to be in. Because the moment someone cheaper shows up, everything gets shaky again. I remember noticing this pattern more clearly when I started getting more consistent inquiries. People would come in, ask questions, compare, hesitate, and I could feel it. The decision wasn't really about the value. It was about the price. And that's when it clicked for me. If the decision is about price, you're already in a race you can't control. Because there's always someone willing to go lower. Always. And the more I leaned into pricing as the advantage, the more I felt stuck in that loop. Adjusting, reacting, trying to stay just slightly ahead, but never actually feeling in control. That's when I started pulling back from that approach. Not dramatically, just slowly. I stopped trying to win on price. And at first, that felt risky. Because if price isn't the advantage, what is? That question forced me to look at the business differently. Instead of asking, how do I make this easier to buy? I started asking, why would someone choose this even if it's not the cheapest? That question is uncomfortable because it exposes gaps. It forces you to look at positioning, clarity, outcomes, all the things that pricing can hide. But it's also where things start to change. I began noticing that the strongest businesses I respected weren't competing on price at all. In fact, they were often more expensive. And yet, people weren't hesitating the same way. They weren't comparing in the same way. The decision felt different, more decisive, more intentional. And I realized it wasn't just about what they were offering. It was about how clearly that offer was positioned, what it meant to choose it, what kind of result it represented. Once that became clearer to me, pricing started to feel less like a weapon and more like a reflection of how the business is positioned. Because when positioning is weak, pricing becomes the thing you lean on. But when positioning is strong, pricing becomes less of a question. The moment you stop competing on price is usually the moment you start strengthening everything else. And that shift changes how people experience your business. When you're competing on price, the interaction feels transactional. People are evaluating, comparing, looking for the best deal. But when price isn't the main variable, something else takes its place. Clarity, trust, perceived value, fit. The decision becomes less about saving money and more about making the right choice. And those are very different decisions. I also noticed something else. When I stopped competing on price, fewer people said yes, at least initially. But the ones who did felt different, more certain, less hesitant, more aligned. And that alignment made everything easier. The conversations were simpler. The expectations were clearer. The outcomes were stronger. And over time, that mattered more than volume. Because now, the system wasn't built on constant persuasion. It was built on alignment. Competing on price brings volume. Competing on value brings stability. That distinction took me a while to fully appreciate. Because volume feels like growth. More sales, more activity, more movement. But stability is what actually allows the business to scale without breaking. And price competition rarely leads to stability. It leads to pressure. Pressure to maintain margins. Pressure to keep attracting more people. Pressure to keep adjusting. Whereas, stepping away from price competition creates a different kind of path. It forces you to build something that stands on its own. Something people choose for a reason beyond cost. And once that starts working, it compounds. Because now you're not just another option in a list. You become a specific choice. And being a specific choice is powerful. It reduces comparison. It reduces hesitation. It reduces friction. Looking back, the shift wasn't about increasing prices overnight. It was about changing what I was competing on. Moving away from price. And moving toward clarity, positioning, and alignment. Because once those are strong, pricing doesn't have to do all the work. And that's the real turning point. When pricing stops being the reason someone chooses you and starts being something they accept because they've already decided. That's when things change. Not just in revenue, but in how the business actually feels to run. Because now, you're not reacting to the market. You're shaping how the market sees you. And that's a very different position to operate from. It's quieter, more controlled, less reactive, and over time, far more powerful. Because you're no longer trying to win the cheapest option. You're building something people choose on purpose. And once that happens, price stops being the battlefield and starts becoming part of the structure. Something that supports the business, instead of something the business depends on.